afraid of the dark.
Hello, my listeners. Today you're going to hear 3 creepy stories about what your relatives might be hiding, what an ordinary doorbell can lead to, and the third story is about an incident during a night watch. Subscribe to the channel, share your opinion in the comments, and I wish you a pleasant listening. When Uncle Gregor came for the summer with his daughters, Tina was over the moon. You bet she was. 2 girlfriends. One was 12, the other 10 years old. Tina's age was right in between. She was 11. Her parents, successful surgeons, lived in Germany in a private home. Don't ask why American doctors ended up overseas. Tina didn't explain, and I didn't feel comfortable asking. All I know is that friends gathered at their home every summer. Uncle Gregor was one of them, but unlike the other guests, he preferred not to have intelligent conversations over a glass of beer, but to play with the girls. He was always up to something, my friend told me. Once he suggested that we imagine that one of our trio was dying and we had to save her. I rejoiced. How interesting. I'm going to learn CPR, and Uncle Gregor did. First, under the guise of first aid, he began to feel Tina's breasts. By the time she was 11 years old, she had managed to grow a little, and then put his tongue in the girl's mouth. This is just one of the episodes. As Tina said, during the game, the hands of kind Uncle Gregor often ended up under her skirt or behind her back. Even worse, this family friend behaved in the same way with his daughters. I won't go into the details, take my word for it. They are horrible. Tina was a naive child back in the 80s. She didn't realize what was going on right away. She simply began to shun the unpleasant guest. At the same time, she noted to herself that his daughters were behaving strangely. They would cry out of the blue or fight or start kissing everyone. You know, crippled psyche. And one day, after another stormy scene, the 2 girls ran away to the lake. It was a 15-minute walk from the house. They ran away and never came back. An hour later, 2 hours later, it was already dark outside, and they still didn't show up. Uncle Gregor went with Tina's parents to look for them. They came back an hour and a half later, pale, depressed. Tina's mom was hysterical. Her father could barely stand. They found the girls. They found them sitting in a tree near the water. Both of them weren't moving. When we got closer, we found out the sisters were dead. Imagine the picture: 2 motionless figures on the branches of an old tree. From afar, it looks like the children are just lurking in the tree. They're about to jump down and run towards the adults. But no, strangled. Naturally, the investigation began. While it was underway, Uncle Gregor was ordered not to go anywhere. Tina remembers him becoming more and more inadequate by the day. He would drop forks at the table. He would often start crying. He hardly ever left his room. Everyone sympathized with him, except Tina. For some reason, she thought he was faking it. On the 3rd day after the tragedy, my friend had a dream. A woman was standing at the gate of their house, bright, smiling. She said, "Is Gregor home now? I need to see him." Tina went to open the door, but suddenly she was so frightened that she woke up. The next night, the dream was repeated. Again, the woman at the gate, be let in, and again something prevented Tina from complying. On the 3rd night, the dream changed. Now there were 2 girls standing behind the woman's back, Uncle Gregor's dead daughters. "Let me in," said the older one. "You know everything. You must help us, please," says the younger one. And the woman is silent. She smiles and strokes their heads. Tina resolutely pulled back the deadbolt, opened the door, and the guests entered. That was the end of the dream. Tina woke up to a noise downstairs. She came downstairs and there were policemen. Uncle Gregor had come to pick her up. As my friend later realized, the autopsy revealed that the dead children had been repeatedly raped. Naturally, the father became the prime suspect. Only there was no Uncle Gregor in the room. He was missing. His belongings, documents, money, everything was there, but he was gone. They searched for him for a long time, but no luck. The man had disappeared. The end of this story came only many years later. Tina came to Germany to visit her parents. She sat down with her mother to look through old photos and suddenly sees on one of them, in the company of medical students, vaguely familiar face. It was the same woman who in her dream asked to be let into the house. "Who is it?" asks her friend. "It's Viola, Uncle Gregor's wife. You remember that horrible story, don't you?" Of course, Tina remembered. How can you forget something like that? What happened to her? Died of blood cancer when her daughters were just babies. Maybe it was for the best. I didn't find out about that nightmare. We talked about it and forgot about it. That night, Tina had another dream, as if she was walking along the shore of that very lake. No people around. There is no sun in the sky, though it is bright. Suddenly, she sees a child's figure in front of her. A girl standing waist deep in the grass. The little girl is wearing a light-colored dress with yellow flowers. Her hair is braided in a neat basket. It was one of the strangled sisters. But which one, Tina couldn't remember. They were one image to her. "Hey," the girl called, "come here. I want to show you something." Tina felt as scared as when she was a child. Her legs became heavy, her chest tightened with an invisible hoop, her throat became dry. And yet my friend took a couple of steps towards the dead woman. Looking, she knelt down and stroked something in the grass. You can't see it. The next morning, Tina racked her brains over the strange dream and waved her hand in despair. In the evening, she had to fly back. A week later, her mother called her from Germany. "Remember what we talked about before we left? Well, they found Gregor, the pervert. He'd been buried in the ground next to our house all these years. Neighbors found his shoe in the grass, sticking out of the ground. There is justice in this world." One detail struck Tina most of all. The expert examination established that Uncle Gregor had been buried alive. He had suffocated in the ground. He was not deep enough to get out. But something prevented him from doing so. Uncle Gregor's killer, or maybe the killers were never found. Maybe because they were long gone? My doorbell works in such a way that a low, buzzing ring will continue until the person ringing removes their finger from the button. Over the years of living here, I've learned to discern from the ring who exactly has come to see me. Everyone has their own technique. Some ring once shortly, some ring twice with longer intervals, some might press the button until I open the door. Strangers who occasionally visit each of us usually give either one long ring or two short ones. And it's always like that, invariably. A year ago, in the deep of night, there came the unfamiliar sound of 4 short rings. Frankly, it made me somewhat uneasy. I don't live on the ground floor, and the fact that someone had come up to me in the middle of the night for unknown reasons gave me reason to ignore the caller. Luckily, my windows faced the courtyard, and I could easily check who would come out of the entrance. I stood by the window for about 15 minutes, but no one came out, and there were no more rings. On the second day, I again couldn't sleep when someone pressed the doorbell button 4 times. At that moment, I was just coming out of the bathroom, making quite a bit of noise. Even if not the noise, then whoever was on the other side of the front door surely realized that someone was home. I cautiously leaned against the peephole, but to my surprise, I saw absolutely no one in the stairwell. I even dared to open the door and look into the landing, no one. On the 3rd day, I remember I was telling someone this uninteresting story about the nocturnal ringing, And I vividly remembered how at the end of the narrative, I said, maybe death rang the doorbell by mistake. My interlocutors laughed and I suddenly felt a sense of unease. My own words sounded somehow eerie even to myself. That same night again 4 short rings sounded. This truly frightened me. Along with the fear came the thought that maybe it was all in my head. Nevertheless, I moved to open the door, but as before, there was no one behind the door. On the 4th day in the evening, a friend came to me with a request to help fix his mobile phone and just to chat. We stayed up late, and this friend witnessed the calls from the unknown invisible guest on the other side. At the moment when the doorbell rang, I was tinkering with his phone. I pretended to be very engrossed in my work and didn't notice the calls, but I watched my friend and observed whether he heard the sound. Because if he didn't, I would have gone to see a doctor the next day. But my friend heard everything perfectly. "Who's calling on you at this hour?" he asked. Shrugging, I cautiously approached the door again. Of course, there was no one there. Unlike me, this friend was not timid and saying, "Let's deal with these pranksters," now ran down the stairs. That was the last time I saw him. No, he didn't disappear without a trace, nor did he perish under strange circumstances. He simply ran into a drunken and aggressive crowd that beat him to near death, and a few days later he died in the hospital. The most terrifying thing about this whole story was that after this tragedy, all the calls stopped. This story I have never told anyone, and I don't think I ever will in case my identity is discovered. Once upon a time, I was guarding the office at night. Responsibilities were minimal to ensure that no one broke in. I'm very skinny. But if someone managed to break into this unreal iron door at night, even a Marine wouldn't be able to stop them. So I was there more for show, to let the bosses in, and also to make sure the ceiling didn't leak. Sometimes pipes on the 2nd floor burst. And once a week, I had to wash the windows from the inside. In general, the job was simple and not dusty, and there were computers with various simple games like Heroes of Swords and Magic, which was more than enough for me. I spent nights in this office from Saturday to Sunday. Everything was always calm. Keys were only held by the director, some manager, and me. And one Saturday while I was playing a game, something started making noise on the other side of the door. Just once. I approached, looked through the peephole, no one. I thought they just passed by and returned to my game, but as soon as I sat down on the chair, something scratched again, and an entirely indistinct male voice and knocking on the door were heard. I thought it was the director, so I inserted the keys, turned them once, and looked through the peephole again, still no one there. I loudly said, "Is that you?" No response. I turned the key back, and immediately from the other side of the door, a voice was heard, this time female. Again, I couldn't make out a word. It seemed like she was talking, but the syllables were meaningless. Then I loudly cursed them all through the door and threatened to call the police. I lied, there were no phones inside. I only knew that theoretically there should be a fire call button somewhere. Still don't know if it was there or not. A second later, after that, the female voice fell silent, and there was a faint knock on the window. I opened the blinds and was stunned. No, not just stunned. I was terrified. My legs gave way, and I sat on the floor. A person was hanging on the bars. I want to believe it was a person. Everything about them was completely unnatural. It seemed like someone had only seen people in movies and made themselves a suit to look like a person and put it on. I couldn't even roughly determine their gender. And as soon as they saw me, they started speaking first with a female voice, then alternating by syllable with a male one, then as if the voice came from several sources, with some creaks and rustles. Their facial expressions were completely inhuman. They moved all facial muscles in all possible directions simultaneously. With their hands and feet, they were banging on the glass while rising up. Maybe they squeezed the bars between their knees and climbed up, I don't know. At that moment, it seemed to me that they were flying up. I could see them perfectly, and they hung there for a very long time, probably a minute, and I couldn't do anything at all, just sat on the floor and stared at this creature. After about a minute, there was a sudden relief. Suddenly all the sounds stopped, and they abruptly turned, I swear. Their head turned 100 degrees, almost over their shoulder, and froze for several seconds, staring somewhere. And then they jumped off and said something new, in a low vibrating voice, and left. Where they went, sitting on the floor, I couldn't see. I had enough strength only to close the blinds and crawl into the room where neither the door nor the windows were visible. There I sat and cried like a little child. The last time I cried was about 8 years ago. Then this state passed and I started shivering violently. So on the floor I sat until 6 in the morning, scared of every sound, until my partner arrived. I probably stared at him through the peephole for about 2 minutes and asked him to either step away or say something. Eventually I let him in, and he immediately gave me a heavy slap on the back of my head, and in response I just laughed happily and hysterically, tears again in my eyes. In general, I came home, my parents can't understand what happened to me. Pale, dark circles under my eyes, lost 7 kilos overnight. Since then, I often sleep poorly at night and have nightmares. I haven't told anyone among my acquaintances, not a word or hint, they'll just laugh. Why didn't I go crazy after that? Logically speaking, I think if he specifically needed me, I wouldn't tell this story. I think I just happened to encounter him, and then he got distracted by something else and forgot about me. Well, I'd like to think so.